Shalom, shalom, wonderful friends. It is great to be with you. It is great to see all of you, each of you who I value so much being here with us each week. And you cannot do 50 transformative psychology studies and theories and Jewish perspectives on them without touching on Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is one of the crucial. I mean, to be sure, I have 150 on the list who I feel are crucial, so I'm still struggling to figure out who to cut in this in the coming 40. But we had a lot of fun last week with beauty. I loved your insights on beauty. And if you missed that one, I hope you'll check the recording so you can hear the group's insights on beauty and attractiveness and bias and studies of virtue connected to beauty. And today we're going a very different direction, and but a very important one. So let's start with a poll question. Survival is most linked to physical strength, luck, ability to make meaning, or God. When you think about survival, individual survival, collective survival, how do you think about okay, no one says physical strength, 20% say luck, 70% say ability to make meaning, and 10% say God. Very interesting. And of course, it's a complicated question, like all of these, because there's so many different ways to survive. How do you survive a really harsh diagnosis? How do you survive mental illness? How do you survive bullying or self-esteem as a teenager? How do you survive collectively as a people, as a culture? So we will dive into some of that. Viktor Frankl, born in 1905, passes in 1997, was an Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist who, through his trials and tribulations, became one of the most significant figures in modern psychology through his development of logotherapy, a theory deeply influenced by his harrowing experience as a Holocaust survivor. Although over his extensive career he authored over 36 books, Frankl is primarily known for his seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning, a work that has resonated with millions. Oh, yes, resilience. Yes, Sarah, is going to be a separate category. We're going to come back to that in a separate session. So thank you for flagging that. In Man's Search for Meaning, first published in 1946, that's crazy that he wrote this in 1946 as a survivor. A lot of Holocaust books didn't come out till the 60s or 70s, really 70s. And written over the course of only 9 days, Frankl reflects on his harrowing experience as a Holocaust survivor. It's on this reflection where he develops his theory of logotherapy. Man's Search for Meaning chronicles not only Frankl's personal journey through the unimaginable horrors of Nazi concentration camps, including his time at Theresienstadt, but also his profound insights into human nature when humans are pushed to the most extremes of suffering as well as resilience. Frankl's central thesis is that in the direst of circumstances, survival depends less on physical strength, cunning, or spiritual conviction, and more on an individual's ability to detect meaning in their suffering. Frankl observed that those who were able to endure the depravity and unimaginable horror of the concentration camps did so not because they were any stronger or smarter, more religious or more secular, but because they had something to live for, something that gave their individual suffering a sense of purpose. As he writes, if there is a meaning in life at all, then there must be a meaning in suffering. Suffering is an ineradicable part of life, even as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. Frankl's question, Frankl's question is not what is the meaning of life, but what is the meaning of my life? Right? It is not a philosophical question that is to be universalized. It is a question of personal meaning. What is the meaning of my life? Logotherapy, the psychotherapeutic approach that Frankl developed, is based on the premise that people are driven primarily by a will to meaning, the desire to find significance in their own lives. This stands in contrast to other psychoanalytic theories, such as Freud's focus on the will to pleasure and Adler's will to power. Core to logotherapy is the idea that even in the most extreme circumstances, individuals retain the freedom to choose their response in those conditions. He writes, as such situation in life represents a challenge to man and presents a problem for him to solve, the question of the meaning of life may actually be reversed. Ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Frankl emphasized that people are not meek victims of their environment, active participants who shape their experience through deliberate choices. This freedom to determine one's inner response, even in the face of maximal suffering, is a cornerstone of logotherapy and is rooted in existential philosophy, which asserts that human beings are responsible for creating meaning in their lives through their actions and decisions. Right? I don't look to the government to solve my problems. I don't look to my therapist to solve my problems. I don't look to God to solve my problems. Right? I am fundamentally responsible to make meaning of my life. I am fundamentally responsible to make meaning of my suffering. Certainly, the emphasis on free will within logotherapy's epistemic framework represents a departure from other therapeutic models that tend to focus on dysfunction. Just like when we talked about positive psychology, distancing itself from dysfunction towards towards positive empowerment, self-empowerment. Traditional approaches in psychology, as discussed, usually view individuals primarily through the lens of pathology, aiming to diagnose and treat mental illness or maladaptive behaviors. Frankl's logotherapy, in contrast, presents an optimistic and progressive approach, arguing that humans are inherently meaning-making beings. Instead of centering the therapeutic processes around what is wrong with a person, logotherapy invites people to explore their potential for growth, resilience, and purpose. This perspective laid the foundation for the later emergence of positive psychology, as discussed earlier. Indeed, the positive psychology of Seligman and his school builds on Frankl's supposition by investigating the conditions under which people thrive and their pursuits of meaning as an essential component of a fulfilling life. One of the distinguishing techniques employed in logotherapy is known as de-reflection. Many traditional psychoanalytical approaches encourage patients to confront their anxieties head on, investigating and revisiting distressing thoughts or experiences that contribute to suffering. This method often involves an attempt to desensitize patients to their anxieties by repeatedly exposing them to the source of their distress in a controlled setting. Frankl, however, saw potential hazards with that approach. He argued that constant focus on one's problems would, in some cases, aggravate the issues it sought to resolve, as patients become trapped in a cycle of overanalysis and rumination to the point of obsession with those very sources of anxiety. De-reflection, as a counterpoint, encourages individuals to shift attention away from their anxieties and focus on something meaningful, such as relationships or personal goals. By redirecting focus towards a greater purpose, they can reduce the power of their worries, break cycles of negative thinking, and regain a sense of control and fulfillment, even in challenging circumstances. So you can imagine the other side say, this is avoidance. This is avoidance of problems. You need to look it head on, right? You need to go deep into your problems. And Frankl's response is, no, you're making the problem worse. Focus on the good, focus on the meaning, rather than just obsessing with the problem. A critical methodology within logotherapy is the deployment of Socratic dialogue, where the practitioner asks thoughtful, probing questions to help patients explore their own thoughts, values, and experiences. This technique encourages patients to clarify their sense of purpose, recognize the significance of their struggles, and identify sources of meaning in their lives. By guiding patients towards self-exploration, the therapist fosters introspection and personal agency, enabling individuals to uncover meaning from within rather than relying on external solutions. Through this process, patients gain a deeper understanding of what matters most to them, empowering them to take control of their life's direction and build a more meaningful existence. Central to Frankl's philosophy is the notion that with free will comes great responsibility. People are not only free to make choices in how they respond to life's challenges, they are also responsible for those choices and the impact they have on their lives. Frankl believed that the essence of human existence lies in the ability to choose, but this freedom is paired with an obligation to live authentically and purposefully. Indeed, for Frankl, meaning is not something that is passively received or bestowed by others. It is a personal achievement that requires individuals to actively engage with their circumstances, even in the face of profound suffering. Meaning can be the difference between despair and resilience. Now, many people today, of course, throw off this responsibility. I'm a Reformed Jew. I believe what Reformed Jews do. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I believe what Orthodox Jews do. I'm a Democrat, a Republican. I believe with what my party believes, right? I don't have to work through my meaning of life, right? Um, or I'm a cancer patient. And so I read a book that a cancer patient wrote, and their meaning works for me, right? Now, I want to be gentle here because not everyone, perhaps, is capable of constructing all of their meaning. Maybe they don't have the time, maybe they don't have the tools, right? Maybe, some people might throw out the word privilege. But I do think that there is a challenge here for us to not throw off this responsibility that Frankl raises. Frankl emphasized that personal responsibility goes beyond immediate actions, extending to the overall direction of one's life and the meaning created in both good and bad times. He argued that despite external circumstances, individuals have the freedom and responsibility to choose their inner response. He writes, live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you have acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now. Thus, logotherapy is not merely a therapeutic technique, but a philosophy that empowers individuals to shape their lives with purpose and intentionality. By finding meaning, particularly in suffering, people can achieve fulfillment and inner strength. However, this raises ethical concerns. Is the pursuit of meaning always moral? Frankl's emphasis on subjective meaning leaves room for the possibility that individuals may find purpose in harmful or destructive endeavors, as seen in the case of the Nazis during World War II. This critique also brings up deeper questions. Does everyone possess the capacity to find meaning, especially when faced with overwhelming suffering or tragedy? Is it fair to expect individuals to derive meaning from their pain when they may lack the emotional or psychological resources to do so? And if they cannot find meaning, does that imply they are somehow failing in their existential search? Someone is in pain most of the day. Maybe they're not at a 10 out of 10, but maybe they're not at a 4 out of 4. Maybe they're out of a regular 7 out of 10 pain. Can such a person constantly construct meaning of such pain? A powerful counterexample to this critique can be found in the lives of individuals such as the late actor Christopher Reeve, famous for playing the hero Superman in film, or Michael J. Fox, who turned their own debilitating illnesses, paralysis and Parkinson's disease, respectively, into sources of meaning. Maybe you saw Fox receive a Medal of Freedom from President Biden just a few weeks ago as he shook on stage. These individuals did not merely survive their diagnoses. Instead, they found purpose and used their platforms as major figures in popular culture to advocate for others and increase public awareness about these conditions. We've seen some similar heroism in the LA fires, celebrities who may have lost a lot, but use their platforms to advocate and support. Their stories exemplify how suffering can lead to a deeper sense of meaning and fulfillment, not only for oneself, but for others as well. Yet their examples also highlight another potential critique. Is Frankl's approach overly cognitive? Is it too focused on intellectual meaning making without considering the broader aspects of healing, such as the emotional, physical, and social factors? Frankl's philosophy, especially when applied to Holocaust survivors, seems to have the implication that meaning making is one of the primary, if not the central, factors in survival. He observed that those who could find purpose even in the bleakest of circumstances, depths of Nazi death machine, how can anyone be expected, even in the bleakest of circumstances, had a higher chance of enduring the hells of camps? But when we think about the relentless depths of the Nazi death machine, how can anyone be expected to find meaning when they are facing imminent death of their loved ones or the destruction of everything they hold dear in their lives? The randomness of survival in the concentration camps complicates this notion. Sometimes survival was purely a matter of chance, with no opportunity to make meaning before death. This raises the question of whether meaning making is enough in the face of extreme randomness and brutality. So after setting the stage, we come to a major question. Where do Frankl's existential ideas intersect with Jewish thought? In Judaism, the concept of hope is ingrained deep within the tradition. Judaism teaches that even in the face of despair, one must try to cultivate hope. This parallels Frankl's belief that we must find meaning despite suffering. In Jewish tradition, hope is not a luxury. Simply put, it's a necessity and a moral obligation. The ability to hold on to hope, especially in the darkest of times, is not simply something that can be forced or explained, of course. It must be kindled from within, like a sacred flame, often through a deep sense of purpose and faith that transcends worldly suffering. Though it may be surprising to learn based on modern history, in Judaism, suffering is not viewed as a virtue in and of itself. Unlike certain religious traditions that may glorify suffering or ascetic deprivation as a pathway to spiritual growth, Judaism largely takes a fundamentally different stance. Jewish thought tends to lean towards an anti-suffering ethos, in the sense that it actively protests against suffering rather than embracing it or transcending it, whether in prayer, action, or philosophical disposition. Yet Jewish thought also acknowledges that suffering, though not inherently good, can still offer opportunities for reflection and growth when approached with the right mindset. This is reflected in the Talmud, specifically in where it suggests that when a person experiences suffering, they should analyze their deeds. As it is written in Brachot, if a person sees that suffering has befallen them, they should examine their actions. Now, a more maximal read there says, examine it because they're the fault of it, right? A more minimalist read says, we don't know why you're suffering, but suffering is an opportunity for growth and new perspective. This verse doesn't imply that suffering is always a direct consequence of one's actions, but it encourages a process of introspection. This practice of self-examination in times of hardship aligns with Judaism's broader emphasis on moral responsibility and self-improvement. Even when suffering is seemingly unjust or random, it can become an impetus for spiritual growth, encouraging a person to consider how they can align more closely with their values and better themselves in the process. While Judaism does not idealize suffering, it does see it as a reality of being human. And like any reality, suffering can be utilized for a higher purpose. The Torah and the Talmud often emphasize the importance of finding meaning or growth in adversity. This doesn't mean that suffering is welcomed, but it acknowledges that once it's present, it can be an opportunity for introspection, transformation, and renewal. The ability to make sense of suffering, to interpret it in a way that fosters growth or connection with a higher purpose, is vital to the Jewish approach. This is not to say that suffering is good again, but it can serve as a catalyst for personal and communal growth, offering lessons that might not otherwise be accessible in times of comfort. In our tradition, suffering is often seen as a call to action, both internal and external. Internally, it encourages reflection and repentance, a process of returning to the right path. Externally, suffering compels the community to take action to alleviate the pain of others, reinforcing the obligation to repair this broken world. The Jewish response to suffering is not one of passive endurance, but of active engagement, fostering both personal growth and a profound sense of collective responsibility. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE was a pivotal moment in Jewish history, marking a profound rupture in the spiritual and communal life of the Jewish people 2,000 years ago. Yet out of this immense tragedy and dislocation emerged an extraordinary period of creativity and resilience. The Jewish survival instinct, rather than being extinguished by suffering, was galvanized, leading to a new era of thought, culture, and religious practice. This period saw the rise and really creation of rabbinic Judaism, where new institutions and forms of study replaced the temple as the center of Jewish life. One of the key figures in this transformation, most famously, was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who during the Roman siege of Jerusalem famously asked for Yavne, a small town, where he could establish a Talmudic academy rather than fighting for the physical temple itself. His foresight laid the momentous groundwork for Jewish survival, not in a physical space, but through learning, discussion, and the development of the Talmud as we understand it today. This shift represents a different take on Jewish survival, one not rooted in physical might, but in intellectual and spiritual perseverance. This is kind of a radical approach. Many people today talk about Jewish survival as a strong IDF or as a strong American Jewish political power, to be exercised and leveraged in DC. That is one approach. Another approach, championed by the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, as well as anti-Zionists, is one of that moves beyond the political and beyond the realms of power. Some have critiqued Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. How could you not have fought for the temple? How could you not have fought for Jerusalem, right? You should have used your leverage with Rome, right? Instead, he pivoted and said, the old Judaism is dead. It is dead. We are no longer a temple religion. They have destroyed it, and there's no hope to rebuild that. We are now an intellectual tradition, a spiritual tradition, not a priestly religion, and not a sacrifice tradition, an animal sacrifice tradition. One could even look further back to this transformation as symbolized in the story of the two sets of tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. After breaking the first set of tablets in response to the sin of the golden calf, Moses later reascended the mountain to receive the second set. According to Jewish tradition, both the broken and the whole tablets were kept in the Ark of the Covenant as the Israelites journeyed through the desert. This powerful image serves as a symbol for healing and survival. We must carry both our brokenness and our wholeness as we move forward in life. Just as the Israelites carried their shattered past alongside their renewed covenant, so too must individuals and communities learn to make meaning from both the pain and from the recovery. This idea is reflected in the Jewish wisdom books, which teaches that 7 times the righteous man falls and gets up, while the wicked are tripped by one misfortune. It is not the absence of failure or suffering that defines righteousness, but the resilience to rise again and continue on. The late Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, wrote eloquently about how Judaism responds to darkness through a never-ending ideal of seeking hope. He writes, Judaism is a religion of details, but we miss the point if we do not sometimes step back and see the larger picture. To be a Jew is to be an agent of hope in a world serially threatened by despair. Every ritual, every mitzvah, every syllable of the Jewish story, every element of the Jewish law is a protest against escapism, resignation, or the blind acceptance of fate. Judaism is a sustained struggle, the greatest ever known, against the world that is in the name of the world that could be, but is yet to be. Put in JFK's quote there. There is no more challenging vocation. Throughout history, when human beings have sought hope, they have found it in the Jewish story. Judaism is the religion, and Israel the home of hope. Frankl's experience in the Holocaust echo this profound Jewish wisdom about suffering and survival. His philosophy teaches that suffering, while not inherently good, can be endured and even transcended if it is imbued with meaning. As he writes, suffering ceases to be suffering in some way at the moment it finds meaning. Frankl believed that when suffering is unavoidable, the ability to find a higher purpose or significance in that suffering is what enables a person to endure it. This is a concept deeply embedded in Jewish thought, where suffering is often viewed as a means of growth or a pathway to a closer relationship with God. The biblical story of Job is a powerful illustration of this idea, as Job wrestles with the injustice of his suffering, questioning God, but ultimately arriving at a deeper, though painful, understanding of the divine. Job's journey mirrors the Jewish tradition of grappling with suffering, not passively accepting it, but actively seeking meaning and understanding within it. In this way, the Jewish disposition towards meaning-making from suffering aligns closely with Frankl's existential philosophy. Both emphasize the importance of finding purpose in adversity, whether that be through faith, personal growth, or service to others. The story of Jacob wrestling with the angel offers another rich metaphor for this process. Jacob, on the eve of confronting his estranged brother Esav, spends the night wrestling with a mysterious figure, traditionally understood as an angel or even a representation of his own inner struggles. This spiritual and physical wrestling leaves Jacob permanently marked, both with a new name, Israel, meaning wrestles with God, and with a limp, symbolizing the profound impact of his confrontation. To be a Jew, then, is to wrestle with the meaning of one's life, to grapple with hardship and emerge transformed. To paraphrase, Frankl postulates that the question is not, what is the meaning of life, but again, what is the meaning of your life? Judaism's emphasis on hope and responsibility also plays a central role in the wrestling with meaning. While suffering is never glorified, the ability to find purpose and resilience in its aftermath is a core value. This was evident in the aftermath of the destruction of the Second Temple, when Jewish leaders like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai refused to let the Jewish people's identity be destroyed along with the physical temple. Instead, they redefined what it meant to be Jewish, placing the emphasis on study, community, and ethical living. This ability to adapt, survive, and ultimately thrive in the face of hardship is a hallmark of Jewish history and continues to resonate with Frankl's belief that meaning can be found even in the darkest of times. Thus, both Judaism and Frankl's logotherapy converge on the idea that suffering can lead to growth. But these outlooks also raise critical questions about the nature of that transformation. How do we ensure that the meaning we create is morally sound? What happens when the suffering feels too great to bear, or when someone cannot find meaning in their pain? Frankl's philosophy acknowledges the tremendous responsibility that comes with the freedom to create meaning. Similarly, Jewish wisdom shares that while we are obligated to make sense of our lives, we are also part of a larger moral framework, one that demands compassion, justice, and hope. As Jacob's wrestling with the angel reminds us, the journey towards meaning is often painful and complicated, but it is a journey worth taking, For in it, we find identity, purpose, and true resilience. One of Frankl's most famous insights is his statement: between every stimulus and response, there is a moment where we can pause for reflection. This idea encapsulates a key aspects of Frankl's existential philosophy, that human beings are not purely reactive creatures, like animals driven solely by instinct or conditioned responses. Instead, we possess the unique capacity for self-awareness, which allows us to consciously choose how to respond to the circumstances we face. In that brief moment between a stimulus and our reaction, we have the freedom to decide how we will act. This moment, however small, is where our true agency lies. Friends, to move to conclusion, Frankl's insight presents a strong challenge to the deterministic views of human behavior put forth by B.F. Skinner and the behaviorist school of thought we looked at session 1. Skinner's theories focus on the role of environmental conditioning, suggesting that humans, much like animals, respond predictably to stimuli, shaped by reinforcement and punishment. While behaviorism offers valuable insights that we explore into learned behaviors, Frankl argued that it fails to capture the complexity of human experience, particularly our capacity for choice and self-determination. In contrast to Skinner's reductionist view of external forces driving behavior, Frankl emphasized the external forces that define humanity, the will to meaning, and the freedom to choose one's response to circumstances. For Frankl, it's precisely in the decision-making process that individuals create meaning, and this unique capacity to transcend external conditions distinguishes humans from animals or machines, right? Think about AI and ChatGPT and all these conversations around knowledge and misinformation, and Meta's move away from fact checking and the desire to replace. Well, you can't replace choice. Human beings are not merely subject to external forces. We are agents of our own lives, capable of reflecting on our experiences and making deliberate choices about how we will respond to them. This ability to pause, reflect, and choose is at the heart of Frankl's logotherapy, a form of psychotherapy that encourages individuals to find meaning even in the face of suffering. Frankl's work offers a powerful counterpoint to deterministic theories, reminding us that while we may not always have control over the events of our lives, we always have control over how we choose to respond to them. This small yet profound moment of freedom empowers individuals to rise above even the most challenging circumstances, reclaiming their humanity by choosing how they respond and find meaning in adversity. Okay, my dear friends, that is Frankl and logotherapy in a nutshell. As it's connected to responsibility and existential philosophy, I would love to hear some of your thoughts and questions today of how this is resonating or not. Yes, Aglaya.
Okay. Hi, can everyone see me?
Hi.
All
Nice
right,
to
cool.
see you.
All right, so I'm gonna pull this up. All right, so I have my copy like here on my Kindle app and everything though. But I remember like thinking about in the foreword to the edition that I read, he was talking about Frankl was talking about why he didn't escape. So I'll just read this section, okay? It was then that I noticed a piece of marble lying on a table at home. When I asked my father about it, he explained that he had found it on a site where the National Socialists had burned down the largest Viennese synagogue. He had taken the piece home because it was part of the tablets on which the Ten Commandments were inscribed. One gilded Hebrew letter was engraved on the piece. My father explained that this letter stood for one of the commandments. Eagerly, I asked, which one is it? He answered, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land. At that moment, I decided to stay with my father and my mother upon the land and to let the American visa lapse. So, in other words, though, he had his chance to leave, but there was meaning in, I'm just thinking like all of the different things that went through my mind, like the meaning of the Torah, what is the, and all of that, all just million things went through my mind when I read that passage. So I don't know, like I'm kind of looking at it like the way that some of the, like when we were going over the criticisms, like, well, this is for people who are good at this and everything. I'm kind of, I don't know, like, it was my usual skeptical self, though. I'm kind of looking at it from the perspective of, well, I mean, but to someone, okay, say for instance, it's like, with Viktor Frankl himself, for instance, so he could have died. He very well could have died. And then he comes out and he's able to like help all kinds of people and everything. Now, take it though, there was no guarantee that he was going to live. However, though, that moment with his father had enough meaning in it for him that, yeah, so meaning can also like save your life, though, but can also risk your life too. Is the risk worth it? I mean, in this case, it turned out okay. But would we be having a different conversation if he had not lived? So I don't know, like, if anyone wants to, like, jump on any of that, though. But yeah, apparently, though, that meaning, was there when he saw the commandment right there. So
Aglaya, that's awesome. Thank you. And I've never heard about that encounter with his father. So thank you for sharing that. And I think this is how we think about risk in general. We take all kinds of risks, whether it's pregnancy, whether it's, choosing to live in a certain place, or the risk of loving someone, all kinds of risks that give meaning to our lives. We're willing to put ourselves in danger, because of a belief in something. Um, and so thank you for that. And I was also thinking of Zelensky, when you said he had a chance to leave, Zelensky's chance to leave when the war started, but, not taking that airlift. And there's so many other examples, soldiers and, outside the battlefield, many other examples around people who stay in work when they could retire or quit or do all kinds of things, but they feel called and needed, and a whole bunch of things. So, Aglaya, you raised some really interesting points here, and I hope people will pick up on those. Sarah, over to you, Sarah.
Well, I'm going to do an Aglaya thing, and that is to be challenging. But unlike Aglaya, I'm not going to apologize beforehand. So when we talk about suffering and looking for meaning and taking a turn, I think about all of those people in Germany after the First World War who were suffering economic strife and despair. That, here they are, they'd lost what they believed in and looked for meaning. And they found their meaning with what I would think of as a crazy person who gave them something to believe in, something that gave them meaning in their lives again. And I'm wondering how Frankl or any of my fellow participants would see that as fitting into this framework of taking our suffering, finding meaning that is personally salvaging, and moving forward in an action that I would find immoral, but for them made perfect sense.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to open the floor for that if folks want to engage with that. David. Hi, David. Oh,
Yeah.
can't hear you yet.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Great.
Yeah. What a stirring talk that you gave, Rabbi. Yeah, the idea that when Rabbi Sachs says Judaism is a religion of hope, how true. I mean, the Dalai Lama said, "My religion is kindness," just to simplify things. And Christians say, "My religion's love." And of course, all the great religions share all of these values, but hope, in the midst of suffering, uh, for Frankl to say suffering must have some meaning because suffering is part of life. And so all of us suffer in so many ways and throughout our lives. And that is the great task, is to rise above it, somehow find meaning in it, and then to live that second life. I had never heard that before, that you live your second life, through your knowledge, through your experience, the time that you have left, even better than the first. So that was really great. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Very, very interesting. Thank you. Mara, over to you.
To unmute. It's interesting because when I hear you deliver, the entire talk, I agree with it. Like, it sounds good, it feels good. But when I reflect on experiences of suffering in my life, which fortunately are very few, right? I can say, I've done childbirth. I got rescued from a hike once after 18 miles with no water in the sun, right? So it's few and far between my real suffering. And like, my knee-jerk reaction is to think about what's happening in LA, and whether or not you survived that has really nothing. I mean, if you survived it, right? So to me, it's more like enduring than the actual survival. And yeah, I don't know. When I was in those instances of suffering, I didn't necessarily connect to the meaning at that time. It was much later. I mean, with childbirth, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Like, people do it on purpose. But like getting lost in the woods, honestly, in the desert, my takeaway is really that when you have unavoidable suffering, for me, the best thing to do is to like disconnect and go to that other place where it's meditation or whatever, to get through it. And the meaning is sort of much later and maybe not related to the suffering as the experience at large.
Very interesting. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, very much. And I think you raise good questions for us all to think about how we've done that in our own lives and how we've seen others do it. And we had a survivor speak at VBM last night, and I mean, there's many kinds of survivors, a Holocaust survivor. You could imagine there are some folks who it's very easy to come out of trauma very bitter, very angry, isolationist, scared of the world, angry at the world, hawkish militaristically. And I point no blame at anyone who experienced trauma. But we've also met people who have experienced things like this, who come out full of love and universalistic and full of hope. And although it's never our role to preach to someone else how they should interpret their trauma or suffering, right? For ourselves, how do we ensure that those experiences, if not in the moment of the suffering, later can be reinterpreted, re-understood, to be sure that those are putting out love? I mean, the fear of every parent is that their young child has experiences that they can't recover from. The commentators say that Abraham was tested 10 times. But his 10th test, the binding of Isaac, his son, they say he never came off the mountain psychologically, i.e., from each trauma of a test, he recovered. He was strengthened by each challenge. But this one was too much for him, and he psychologically never came off the mountain. And we might ask ourselves, I'm certainly going to ask myself, what are some experiences we've had where we've never really come off that mountain, right? Something hurt us bad enough that we became risk averse or love averse because of how love can hurt, right? Or we've stepped back from being open, we became more closed. And we've all had some of those experiences as well. And is there a chance to open up a little bit more to kind of reinterpret some of that past? So yeah, thank you for that. I think I saw another hand go up, or someone was going to jump in a moment ago. Oh yes, hi Ken. There we go.
It wasn't my hand earlier, but anyway.
Oh, okay.
I thought I would jump in. The discussion has been almost as fascinating as your talk that started us off. From the little I know about Frankl before the talk, it wasn't the Holocaust that drove him to logotherapy, but it was something that he'd done before Hitler came into power. And so it wasn't necessarily a reaction to that particular suffering that led him to this theory, which I think makes it even more interesting that he's come up with this theory of having meaning as a way of surviving suffering. What the discussion led me to think about is, the fact that it may be personally beneficial. I mean, I think the first house I bought with a friend of mine in Pacific Palisades. He lived there until last week. Um, and along with most of his neighbors, the house is gone. So I mean, he's been in this house for over 40 years, and you can hear the suffering in his voice. I do believe, I hope that one way to recover from such tragedy is to search for the meaning of it and to search for meaning in your life. Because I do think it's very difficult for most people who go through that kind of suffering, whether it's a natural disaster or a person-caused disaster, like the Holocaust was and like war is, that in order to get around it, this may be one of the ways that helps you. And I do think that, as Sarah pointed out earlier, it's not always morally beneficial, the kind of meaning you find. So sometimes you're going to find meaning that's not necessarily morally beneficial. And so we, as a people, need religion to give us the morality as well, to go along with the psychological kinds of aspects that we're going through. I mean, I know, again, my mother told me about what it was like to live in Germany during the inflation, the hyperinflation that occurred in the 20s, and how, you would have to get paid twice a day in order to run down and get what little milk there was, before the marks that you had were completely worthless. So man-made suffering, caused by the end of the First World War. There had to be some reaction to all that, and I don't think it was necessarily Nazism. I mean, Hitler never did get a majority vote from the German people, but he did know how to use the levers of power to get his way. So it's a troubling topic, but I think that Frankl has one direction of how one can go through it.
Thank you, Ken. And I suspect most of us have friends who have lost their homes as well. I have many friends who have, and it's just very hard to read these, hear those stories. And thank you for reminding us of that, as was reminded earlier. And yes, also thank you for reminding us that he was working on these ideas prior to the Shoah. And to be sure, some of his harshest critics point to that being the very flaw of it. They say he was opportunistic to, fit the theory he was developing beforehand, into his Holocaust experiences. And they even point to some contradictions or inaccuracies involved in it. I don't share those critiques. But, I'm less concerned with what his experience was and more with, is this helpful to people? And although I certainly don't think anything is the only tool in the toolbox, I know many people have been very moved and found this to be very helpful within their own experience. Hi, Janie, over to you.
Good. Again, this morning was just, I'm going to have to go into the podcast and listen 5 more times. This was absolutely amazing, and I've always loved reading Viktor Frankl. It's been at least 60 years since I first read him, and I'm always taken by the thought that you cannot control what happens to you, but you can control your response to it. Years ago, again, another probably 60 years ago, I went to a seminar, it was several days, with William Glasser in California, and he has what he called choice therapy. And it's the same thing, that people do not choose what happens to them, but they control their response to it. And when I thought a lot about that, I thought, inherent in this issue of suffering is the very word suffering. We've already said, oh, it's a bad thing. It's suffering. We're going to feel horrible. It's going to change our lives in a negative way. But if you look at it not as a suffer, but a challenge, then that turns it 180. It's not something that's happening to you that's despair, but it is something, a challenge that you look at, you feel through, and you think, how can I come out of this in a positive way? How can I be, can I involve in some way?
Very nice. Thank you for moving on this in that direction. I like that. I'm sure we all have pivotal moments in our life we look back to in our journeys. You know, one little one of mine was my collapse as a teenager, where we were very stable, at least I thought, and my parents very suddenly got divorced, and my father filed for bankruptcy, and we lost the house, and everything I knew collapsed. We didn't have a home, and my parents got divorced, and that was a moment I actually pivoted very deeply towards Judaism. Now, the question that rises for me decades later is, when is it an escape? And when is it kind of a productive evolution? An escape can be obvious, a time when like you turn towards heavy drinking. So, I got a problem in my life. I'm going to make meaning of it with tequila. Well, that's not really great meaning making, nothing against tequila, but you could do a little better with your meaning making, right? But other times it might be gray. When am I making meaning of my suffering in a way that's escaping? And when am I making meaning in a way that's actually generative? And I look back with my turn towards religion at that time, and I say, it did a lot of good for me. But I wonder, there was also, an attempt to kind of escape and find new community where I lost my community. So I throw that question out to folks to think about as well as, what are some less productive ways to make meaning as well? Okay, we didn't hear yet from Eileen or Gary or Steve or Matthew, Shulamit or Alex or Ariel. Yeah, hi, Eileen.
To me, the most important thing from Viktor Frankl is the liminal moment. You're given something and you have a choice, an opportunity to react. And how do you react determines everything that happens from then on. Your change right now from when you were a teen and your life was in chaos, you turned to religion. And that has enabled us to have all your teachings. And if you didn't, you would be in some other service career. I'm positive of that. But your choice, and every choice you make, there are steps that follow that bring you to the person you are today. And I'll give you one funny example. My husband and I had known each other from 5th grade. I hadn't seen him in years. And I was taking my master's degree and taking classes on Friday nights, and they were interrupting my social life. So I went to the school to withdraw. I did that. I'm in the elevator. The elevator stops at the 6th floor, which is the law school floor. I'm at the front of the elevator. My husband is standing to get on the elevator. We recognize one another. And 3 weeks from that day, we're married, all from wanting to have more social life.
Awesome, Eileen. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that. Awesome. Steve, or some others we haven't heard from yet. We'd love to see, or Shulamit, Matthew, Gary. And if any of y'all want to jump in, if not, there's some others who might want to circle back. Yeah, hi, Steve.
Hi. Sometimes there is the ability to react and respond intelligently and with vigor, and other times it's luck. And there are two things that last night's presentation, which I loved, and it's hard to love something that was spawned by disaster. The speaker spoke of his mom's absolute despair in the very early 40s in the Warsaw Ghetto, before the speaker was born. And the speaker said that his mom was ready to chuck it all in and say goodbye. And a friend said, I want you to speak to, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want you to speak to a psychologist or psychiatrist here in the Warsaw Ghetto. Think of that. And see if he can help you overcome your despair and despondency. And the psychologist said, very easy, get pregnant. And that's what she did. And the speaker was born, and the rest is history. It was just a phenomenal tale that he told about the strength of his mom after she took the advice to get pregnant. Think of the luck, though. Where do you find a psychiatrist in the Warsaw Ghetto in the midst of all of what's going on? And two, can you be sure that you will get pregnant? It was tremendous, tremendous luck. And so I think the ability to respond cogently and with vigor is wonderful, but often there is a lot of luck attached to it. Number two, and again, this has to do with the speech last night. Afterwards, I went up to the speaker and I said, one thing I never understood, when was the writing on the wall? Why is it that some people stayed and some people ran for the hills? My dad tried to explain it when we were talking about his Latvian relatives who were destroyed by the Latvian / Germans in the Second World War. He said in the First World War, and he told me his experience, that when the Germans came into Latvia, they handed out candy. They wanted to placate the population. They didn't want to destroy. And so people in the Second World War might have felt this is what's going to happen again. The speaker said, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're so attached to your life. It is just incredible that disaster is looming. So I think there is a lot of luck, and I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, another sign of the speaker's good fortune was he said he was born at 2.2 pounds, if you recall. Yeah. And I asked the doctor after, and he said in the great healthcare system we have today, maybe a 70 to 80% chance of survival rate at that. But in the Warsaw Ghetto, the chance of surviving at 2.2 pounds without any of that is like 1 in a million. So I don't know. I don't know if that's accurate. That's what that doctor thought. But just one closing thought on all of this. I think right now our nation and this society in America is going through a reckoning and is going through a process of renewal or potential renewal. It's no secret that I'm not that I have significant concerns about the incoming presidential administration and some of the movements that are enabling the rise of this, such as the white supremacy and patriarchal movements and Christian nationalists and so on and so forth. And I think if all we do, those of us who are worried, is complain or kvetch or give up, right? I think that that is, or just say it's all broken, or fill our discourse with despair. I think it's a very dangerous time. And I think this is a moment for us to collectively make meaning in new ways of what's happening in this nation, what's happening in this society, how we foster love and compassion, how we combat suffering, and how we can do that in a way that reduces the temperature around some of the hyperpoliticization and actually enables people to talk and make sense of what it means to be an American and what it means to be an American in 2025 and what it means to rebuild a culture of respect and tolerance. So, friends, with that, I give you all the blessings in your meaning making, and I hope we can continue to do it together. Have a beautiful day.